Welcome to the Lens of History. You are with Luke Herbert, speaking with special guests and placing the microscope on current and historical events.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the Lens of History studio. Now that the studio has been renovated, I am back from my break. Joining me in the studio today to discuss the upcoming UK election, and here's a returning guest. I welcome back Martin Bain. How are you today?
Pleasure to be here, Luke, and in this fantastic new studio, and there's even a coffee machine, which is an improvement on the old one.
Oh, there certainly is, and look, we'll get right down to it, because I've been following with quite a bit of interest the upcoming UK election, and I'm going to just start off with an issue that, even though I'm not a Brit, although, being Australian born, I've obviously got some British heritage, that really sort of gets under my skin, and it's Britain and the EU, and I got to say, I don't want to tell the people in the UK how to vote, but to me it looks like the only sensible course is for people to vote to get out of the EU and sever ties with that, what I'll politely call a train wreck. How do you feel about that?
And that's an interesting question, and I think I'm of a generation that were alive when the United Kingdom last had a referendum to join the European community, as it was then. And that, I think many people saw as just a way for Europe to do business and to reduce its tariffs and make its borders easier to transact business. And I think since then it has moved to be much more of a government telling me what I want to do and how I should live my life. So I think in some respects there are many people who question the value of the European Union as a governing body, and I would buy into that, Luke. I certainly wouldn't want the United Kingdom to withdraw from any economic community with Europe, because it's a huge part of our export drive is into Europe. So I'd like to maybe just go back to what Europe was originally, and I think there's probably a number of people who would like to go back to that. What the United Kingdom voted for, Luke, was to join a community that had tariff and trade barriers reduced to the absolute minimums and enabled its people to move across borders and transact business as efficiently as possible. People didn't envisage that you'd have a court that could actually make decisions that the UK Supreme Court or the House of Lords could not. It could overrule them. So I think there is a number of people who would probably vote for UKIP, which is a UK independent party. I think the issue that I think all the minority parties have is that we are traditionally a two-party country. You have the Conservatives, who would be seen as on the right, and you would have Labour, who would be seen on the left. So typically the Conservatives were always seen as supporting business and supporting business people, and the Labour Party have always been seen as supporting the workers, against the employers. And and you could make the parallel that sometimes some people see the Conservatives as trying to make things easier for the bosses rather than the employees. And you go back in our history a little bit here, Luke, and look at what Margaret Thatcher, who was a Conservative Prime Minister, she in many ways reduced the power of the unions absolutely dramatically and broke the National Union of Miners. I mean, she actually broke the power of the union movement by basically, going to war with the National Union of Miners in the 80s. So that's basically how it breaks down. And then beyond that, when you would then have the Liberal Democrats, which are liberals, so they're middle of the road. And then you're going to have all the smaller parties. I mean, certainly one of the bigger parties would be the Scottish National Party, who would typically only have people elected in Scotland. So they are fairly strong in Scotland, and they're left-leaning. They're Labour. They would be similar to Labour in their leanings to the left, to inclusion, and believing that the state should actively help people. And then you get a range of other parties. You certainly get parties in Northern Ireland that will only, you will only get parties that will only elect in Northern Ireland, but they will elect to the UK Parliament. So I think it is an interesting thing with UKIP about whether how many seats and how many people will actually vote for UKIP. And I think for the listeners, Luke, it's worth bearing in mind that we have a first past the post system. So it's basically the candidate who gets the most votes. If you had 10 votes, and you had a candidate had 4 votes, 2 votes, and then down to 1 and 2, the candidate with 4 votes would win, even though they don't have an absolute majority. It is the first past the post who has the most votes. They don't have to win a majority, and that's also the same in the national vote. So no, recollection would say, I certainly think for the most of the last 50 years, no party has had a majority of the people voting for it. But we have a thing also within our parliament called first past the post. So we have 625 seats in our parliament. So the moment you get half of 625 plus 1, you have an absolute majority in the House of Commons. For the last parliament, it was what we call a hung parliament, and there was a coalition between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats.
And just before we move on, do you think that the UK Independence Party has come to being because David Cameron is a weak leader?
No. The UK Independence Party existed before David Cameron became Prime Minister and also leader of the Conservative Party. I think the UK Independence Party has come about because they clearly believe that there is a constituency in the United Kingdom that doesn't like the interference and meddling and the power that Europe and European courts and the European Commission actually has in the United Kingdom, in the fact that they can impose on the United Kingdom. I mean, a really black and white example here, and it will divide our listeners, where in the United Kingdom we did have the death penalty up until I think it was about the 1940s, 1950s, but for heinous crimes, we cannot put people to death. Now, that's just to show a very stark black and white view here. That I think if you had a referendum in the United Kingdom about capital punishment, I suspect it might be very close, but I wouldn't surprise me if the UK people had voted for capital punishment, but currently under our membership of the European Union, we couldn't do that. So I think that's the reason why UK Independence Party, that's a real extreme example, but I think there are a lot of people who said, hang on a minute, we want Europe, we want to work with Europe, not be ruled by Europe. And one of the key things that I think has actually helped the United Kingdom is that we never joined the Euro. And if you look at most of the countries on the fringe of the Eurozone, Ireland, Greece, Italy, Portugal, all those countries on the fringe, they have been crippled by, having even more union because they have the same currency. So I think UKIP are an interesting party. I think because of the UK first past the post system, Luke, I'm not sure how many seats they're going to get out of 625. I guess they might get maybe 3 to 5 seats. So I think their power to influence what's going to happen in the next parliament is very small. Where I actually see them having a bigger influence would be maybe Conservative voters who don't want to vote for the Conservative Party now might vote for UKIP, whereas Labour Party activists typically wouldn't vote for UKIP. So you might get Labour could win more seats because some Conservatives may say, I'm not going to vote Conservative, I want to vote for UKIP. But that then, if you've got constituencies which maybe have got majorities of maybe less than 5,000, someone switching, you don't have to have many people switching a vote from the Conservatives to UKIP to enable the Labour candidate to get in. So I think that's where their power could be, in that they might actually reduce the number of Conservatives, who are probably more of the national parties, of the two national parties, are probably more Eurosceptic than the Labour Party. So I think it's an interesting thing. I don't see them getting huge numbers of seats. I think they could actually massively influence who actually wins, or who gets the majority of the vote, a majority of the seats, so that they could form a coalition. So if suddenly on on the Friday after the election, I don't see UKIP having 50 seats. If they do, I'm going to be very surprised, but I don't see UKIP getting 50 seats.
No, I have to agree with your consensus there, because I think under first past the post, you can get up to, say, 25% of the vote and get a similar number of seats. It's just the way the system works, and it used to happen in New Zealand with smaller parties before we changed our electoral system to MMP. But while we're speaking of governments, you currently have a minority government in the UK, and because of the norm here, because of our electoral system, and they're not really popular in Australia, at least at federal level, as the last Gillard government showed. How do you think the people of the UK feel about a minority government?
A really good question, and I think a lot of people, when it first happened, for the last 2010 general election, I think a lot of people were, oh golly, doomsday, it's all going to fall over. There is a part of me that thinks that it may have reined in some of the things that the Conservatives wanted to do. I don't think they were able to be as aggressive with their spending cuts to reduce the deficits as they would have liked, because they had to rely on the Liberal Democrats to give them the majority, to give them a working majority. So I can see an advantage in that maybe it made the Conservatives not be as brutal and maybe reined them in a bit. So there's a big chunk of me, Luke, that would say I think it probably was beneficial. I suspect next time round, and looking at most of the polls and the predictions, we're going to have another, what we call as a hung parliament. So there is going to be a great deal of horse trading. I think all the parties now are probably gearing up, and I guess there probably have been policy advisors, certainly from the Liberals, the Conservatives, Labour, and probably SNP, who are probably going to be the four parties that are probably, I suspect, going to influence what face or shape of government we have next time round. I suspect there will be back channels about will the Liberal Democrats want to continue working with the Conservatives? I mean, they've already come out and said they don't think they can work with the Conservatives if they want to cut another £18 billion from the welfare budget. And they said they might work with £3 to £5 billion dropped off that one. There's the Labour Party and the SNP, which I think would be a fascinating thing to have a look at. And the SNP, following on from the referendum in Scotland about devolution or breaking the union, I suspect the SNP could have a fairly significant influence on that. And one of the key things the SNP would probably say would be a prerequisite for them joining a Labour government, because I cannot see the SNP ever joining a Conservative government as a coalition. But certainly the SNP, one of their negotiating points would be they would want to stop or cancel Britain's nuclear deterrent, the Trident, and then also the future sub-project. So for SNP, that's a very big thing. I think it's interesting why the SNP would want to do that when the United Kingdom's nuclear submarines are based at Holy Loch in Scotland, and that drives a great deal of business into the Scottish economy. And I suspect that certainly people who live probably within commuting distance of Holy Loch would probably not be that enamoured of the Scottish National Party going into coalition and then finding that base being shut down and thousands of jobs going. So I think it is going to be interesting. I think that we are looking at a time of continued coalition governments, at least for this election cycle. So it's just something I think we just have to get to. And I guess after a while you probably don't much, because you know that the party leading it are probably driving things. So most of the policies are conservative policies that have been enacted. I guess where the Liberal Democrats have scored here, Luke, is they've probably managed to reduce the impact probably at the edges of some of the more extreme things. But other than that, I suspect the Conservatives would have done probably 80 to 90% of what they wanted to do with or without the Liberal Democrats.
And just before we move on to other issues, I've read a few commentaries on the British elections, and one of the things that has interestingly come up is there's actually a fair chunk of voters that are actually starting to get genuinely concerned about defence cutbacks in the UK. And it's interesting to note that the majority of Kiwi voters unfortunately don't care about the issue, but it's a much bigger issue across the Tasman and Australia, fortunately. So given the state that the Royal Navy's currently in, and given the cutbacks to the other two services, how big an issue do you think defence spending is going to be at the election?
My gut suspicion is I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. I think going back to a classic Bill Clinton debate, it's the economy, stupid. It is absolutely what people are interested in. I think people may well, some of the analysts and commentators would say, oh yes, well defense spending's important, but I think most people vote frequently based on, well, what's actually going to end up in my back pocket? Am I going to get more money in my back pocket? Is my job secure? Do I actually think that I'm going to be able to continue to live the lifestyle I want? And I just don't see many people will actually be, factoring. I don't think what any government or any prospective government is going to do over defence spending is probably going to tip the balance whether they're going to vote one way or the other. I mean, I'll be fairly pessimistic here. The number of people that typically influence whether it's a right-leaning government or a left-leaning government is probably less than maybe 3 or 4 million people, because they're the swing voters historically. And I'd welcome your listeners to come and challenge me on this one. Most people who have a right-leaning to vote or a left-leaning to vote will always stay left-leaning or right-leaning. It's the swing voters in the middle that actually influence whether it's a right-leaning or a left-leaning government. And it's the number of people who swing from one party to another in each cycle that actually make the difference. The other thing I would probably also contend, I think a lot of people, they would probably wouldn't want to admit it, and people say, oh no, I make my own mind up. I suspect that a large number of people vote how their parents voted, because that's a very major formative influence on how they think. If your mother and father were very pro-union and pro-workers' rights, I believe there's a higher probability that you are going to be left-leaning. Whereas if your family were maybe wealthier, and you maybe had a different type of education, and maybe your family owned businesses, you are, I believe, more likely to be right-leaning in your voting processes. So I think it comes down to what is the voting in the middle. The other key thing that I'm hearing in the United Kingdom is the number of people that won't vote, and I think that is really interesting. And now there's been some of the research organisations have published some results that say that more women are less likely to vote in this election than the last election. So I suspect that apathy or the lack of voting may well be actually quite a key event, and again, I think, how does that affect things? Well, I think if you're a diehard, Conservative or a diehard Liberal or a diehard Labour or diehard Scottish nationalist, there's going to be a bulk of people who will always go out and vote, whether it be, absolutely perfect weather, rain, snow, sleet, hail, floods, but there will be, and I think that I think is a bigger issue. And I guess the other one is how many younger people who maybe, have become eligible to vote since the last time, how many of them are actually going to be interested and bothered to get away from Facebook and Twitter and all the other things and actually walk to a polling booth, be anywhere from 100 yards to several miles from your house, and go there and then, get hassled by all the people outside saying who you're going to vote for, and then get in there, prove who they are, and then put a cross on a piece of paper. I think that I think also will have a big impact on. I wonder how many people under the age of 25 are going to bother to vote.
Yeah, the youth turnout in terms of voting in New Zealand tends to be on the lower side. I just want to inject a general comment there for a moment. It tends to be people don't vote or start voting till they're 25 or 30, and by then they've already been screwed by student loans and high housing prices. So if I could say something to young people, in particular, I say this in general as well, go out and make a reasoned decision and go out and vote, because, if you, for example, just to stay with young people, if you don't want a massive student loan, the best way to change it is to go out and vote, But just before I move on to other issues, does it sadden you at all that the Royal Navy has been gutted given its proud history? Because I've got to say, even though I'm not a POM, it saddens me that the UK seems to have traded the Royal Navy for the EU. Okay, it might not be the most accurate statement, but don't you just want to go out on a soapbox, wrap yourself up in the Union Jack and say the English Channel exists for a reason?
And unfortunately, there would be people who would say if I wrapped myself in a Union Jack that I'm a racist, and that I don't believe in multiculturalism, and that I should be shunned, and basically I'm not fit to be seen in decent company. So I think I would absolutely accept your point there, Luke, that the Royal Navy has been gutted. I've read some books recently on the logistics. I read a book on the logistics challenges of retaking the Falklands in 1982. The author who was involved in the is a U.S. Navy logistics man who was involved. He looked in afterwards and sort of saw how we did things. He was saying that we were 6 months away. If the Falklands had happened 6 months later, we'd have been in no position to actually retake the Falklands. I mean, you think now we actually have no aircraft carriers that we can call on. We have some helicopter landing assault ships. That is it. Yes, you're absolutely right that for whatever reasons, we've decided to negate our navy. I mean, if you look at Europe, if you look at members of the EU, who actually has a navy as big as the United Kingdom? No one. You think the only reason that we can get that kind of protection is because of NATO, and because if NATO has an operation that involves aircraft, deploying aircraft a long way away, the Americans have to do it. There is nobody else who can actually do it. So I absolutely have to agree with you there. But I think it's a huge balance about, how do you prioritize between your land forces, your air force, and your navy? We've always been an island nation, and the English Channel has existed for some geographic reasons, and has been fairly useful for us when you think of, we've only realistically been invaded twice since 55 BC. You have to go back to the 1939, 1940, when, at the time, probably one of the most powerful military forces in the world came up to the continental coast and looked at England and said, well, have that. And they couldn't get across. I agree with you. I think we probably do have to do something with our navies, but unfortunately, I'll be very controversial, Luke, but you've never known me to shy away from that one. Because we've been prepared to accept corrupt, dishonest, and absolutely negligent bankers, along with, I will be absolutely brutal, some very inept and incompetent political leaders. And I would go on record as saying I believe that Tony Blair should be tried for war crimes, for all the people his lies to the British people caused, all the lives that were lost, both British service people, Allied service people, and loads of civilians. There is a part of me, Luke, which may go against what you've just said about turning out to vote, to think, does how you vote actually change anything? And is actually going to listen to what you want? And are they actually going to do what you want them to do? Or are they just going to promise you the earth? And then the moment they get into power, they're going to be told by somebody else what to do.
And I want to touch on a couple of the issues which are healthcare and education. And in New Zealand, these are two core issues the majority of people vote on. The third one, like the last election, was ranked as child poverty, and I won't touch on child poverty now. But so just in the UK, just how bigger issues are education and healthcare at the election and at your general elections, over the years? Are they the mainstream issues people tend to vote on, like vote deciders?
Yes, they are. They are very big influences. I would probably add in the one that we've touched on is the general economic climate of whether we're going whether we're perceived to be going into a recession or whether we're coming out of a recession. So I think that's one of the major drivers. For your listeners that don't know, we have what's called the National Health Service, which means health services are free at the point of delivery. So via my taxes and via taxes in general, they are put into a huge fund, which is then given out to varying health trusts to ensure that I have access to the medical requirements that my GP say I need. So we don't typically pay. You can pay extra and have private medical insurance. That's for if the NHS is going to take 6 months or 9 months to get you an operation, you can then go and use your private medical insurance to go to a private hospital and be seen a lot quicker. And that's just one element of the whole healthcare. I mean, healthcare can range from anti-smoking, obesity, checking for illnesses, as you get older, trying to keep people fit and active. And I think a lot of people are interested in what governments will do over the healthcare system. I mean, the major differences between the Conservatives and the Labour Party, the Conservatives would believe that you bring in people from business who have experience of running a business to run healthcare. So there is a perception under Conservatives, Luke, that you get more managers who are basically there to balance the books rather than deliver quality healthcare. Whereas people would probably associate the Labour Party more with, no, let's get rid of all these managers and people who are purely there from an administrative point of view and bring more clinicians into managing and controlling what happens in hospitals. I mean, clearly one of the big things is what are waiting times for operations. So if I need an operation, how quickly am I going to see a specialist? If I've got cancer, then how quickly do I have to wait from seeing the specialist and he agrees I've got a cancer to me getting my treatment, maybe going to radiotherapy or chemotherapy through to having an operation. And all the parties are basically vying to say, we will make a commitment that nobody will wait more than X number of weeks or X number of months for any type of surgery. And the parties will vie for that. So I think they are. I think certainly healthcare is fairly important. Education, yes, I think I would say of the three, I think it would be the economy. The economy, stupid to coin the classic phrase. Then I believe it would be the NHS. Then I think it's going to be education would come, a third on that one. And I think if you're a parent who has children, you are probably very interested in, how much money is going to be spent. Is my school going to be controlled exclusively by the Department of Education, or is it going to be a free school? And there's a huge trend in the United Kingdom for, community groups or interest groups to apply for funding to open a school that is maybe has a philosophical or a religious leaning. Typically you find there are schools in the United Kingdom that probably have a Islamic leaning, have a Jewish leaning, have a very Christian leaning. So a lot of what they do is, predicated around that one. You may also get technical schools who say, well, actually, maybe working with a local business, we want to become a technology institute. So I think a lot of people are very interested in that. So I suspect it's going to be a distant third, but I think it's going to be the economy, and then it's going to be health. Then I think it'll be education, and I guess coming down, defence would certainly be there, probably in the top 4 or 5, and then it's going to be down to, what you actually think. And I think one of the interesting things to get across from the UK's perspective is everyone thinks you vote for a party in the United Kingdom. So you vote for the Labour Party, you vote for a Conservative. In the United Kingdom, you don't. You vote for an individual who is affiliated to a party. Hence why in the United Kingdom you could have someone who is elected to the Conservative Party, and then they may decide that they can no longer be a Conservative, and they might move to the Labour Party, they might move to the Liberals, they might move to UKIP. that doesn't cause another election, because the person is elected to represent a constituency, not to represent a party. So I think that's a very important point to get across, that, some people assume that you're voting for a party. No, you're voting for a person in the United Kingdom who is affiliated to a particular political party, but you actually vote for the person. And to me, I've had no one knock on my door yet. I will be sad and admit this to you and your listeners, Luke. I do have a list of questions that I have ready, that when anybody knocks on my door to ask for my vote, I am going to tie them up, because if they want to come and knock on my door and I've got the time, there are some very key questions that I actually want to ask either the representatives or the person who wants my vote. And I believe that's something I have every privilege and right to do, because he's asking me to go and cast a ballot to elect them to the huge gravy train that is Westminster.
And it's interesting because, what you said about the issues in the economy applies in New Zealand and healthcare and education. The only difference, I would say, defence issues would probably, they don't even rank important at all, but some things it is universal the world over. And, I would like to say, I'd just like to say on record too that, I'm against multiculturalism. I've got no problem saying it. So, send some patriotic people to that Union Jack and support the Royal Navy, because it's sustained the UK since the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and will have to do so in any future war. But is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just think one of the interesting things that I have seen is the number of the major parties who are turning round to say that they're going to protect our foreign aid and development budget. And there is a part of me that turns around and says, how can you donate money abroad when there are so many problems in your own country? And I am very focused on, let's get my own country right, because how can I help anybody else if I can't help myself? And the other point that this is one of the questions I have primed up for the people who knock on my door, is to turn around and say, how can you justify giving foreign aid to China, to Pakistan, and to India, when at least those three countries have weapons of mass destruction programs, have nuclear weapons, and spend countless billions of pounds on weapons of mass destruction, typically, certainly for China, India and Pakistan, nuclear weapons, and for China, probably nuclear weapons and chemical and biological weapons. How anybody can have the gall to say that some of my taxpayers' money goes to those countries when their own countries think it's more important to have weapons of mass destruction and actually feed and look after their own people. So, but that's something I've noticed, that all the parties were vying to try and be good, to turn around and say, protect the foreign aid budget. No foreign aid, none whatsoever. Put that £1 billion back into the United Kingdom. I guess the same must apply for New Zealand as well, Luke. Sorry, why should I give money abroad? Do you think that people abroad are going to give me any money if things get tough? The answer, I prayed for your certainly New Zealand listeners, is no one's really going to care.
Oh, I would agree with your thinking broadly. I don't have any problems with humanitarian aid after natural disasters, but I think you've got to teach a man to fish and not give him the fish. But thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
My pleasure, Luke. Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And I guess if people want to argue with me, I guess there's ways that they can communicate with you, and then you can communicate with me. And I'm happy to engage in a dialogue, typically by email if Luke's at. If you want to challenge me on anything, or, I'm more than happy, because I believe that I have a philosophy here of, you can respectfully challenge me on anything. And I'm very comfortable with that. So
I do as well.
Well,
the easiest way is just to leave a comment on the blog post that this program will be appearing in.
I will make a point of having a look, and I will engage you. Don't be afraid of me not engaging you or commenting if you say something. But it's been my pleasure, Luke.
All right, thank you for joining us.
You have been listening to The Lens of History with Luke Herbert.